right, guys, we're finally getting a little bit of a window into the finances of the Black Lives Matter Foundation, their international foundation, which raised massive, many millions amounts of dollars during the Black Lives Matter protests over George Floyd's killings and George Floyd's murder. And there was very little transparency around this organization. They actually hadn't filed the forms that they needed to, that charity organizations are supposed to. And there was a real reckoning that came from other affiliated Black Lives Matter chapters that say, hey, where is this money going? What is it being spent on? We need some transparency and accountability here. There was also some reporting that raised a lot of questions. We covered some of it here, in particular surrounding a $6 million mansion that didn't seem to really have a purpose. And there were a lot of questions about, Patrisse Cullors, who was the head of the organization, and what she was doing with the funds. So we finally got a little bit of transparency here. Let's go ahead and put the New York Times tear sheet up on the screen. The lead graph here says, in the tragic whirlwind year of 2020 with racial justice protests prompted by the killing of Black men and women by police officers, the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation raised $90 million, much of it small donations from rank-and-file supporters. A recent tax filing from the group shows that by the middle of last year, more than half of that money had been granted to smaller organizations or spent on consultants and real estate, leaving the foundation with $42 million in assets. Now, the questions about this spending, which again emerged from affiliated organizations and supporters of the movement, that has caused some turnover at the organization. Patrisse Cullors himself stepped down. You actually had Mignon Moore, a longtime Clinton World aide, who sat on the board for a time. She now has stepped down. Some of the details that came out of this initial and delayed filing are also very concerning. Let's go ahead and put the Yahoo News report up on the screen. So the headline here is Black Lives Matter paid nearly $4 million to board secretary, co-founder's brother, and father of her child. The specific details here are that the payments that are listed in this filing include $970,000 to a company called Trap Heels LLC. That's a company established by Damon Turner, the father of Patrisse Cullors' child, and also $840,000 to Cullors Protection LLC, a security firm owned by her brother, Paul Cullors. That's, again, according to these tax firms. Patrisse Cullors herself received no compensation during the fiscal year, instead serving as a, quote, unpaid volunteer. So that is what we have learned, Saagar.
Yeah, I just think it's ridiculous, the funneling millions of dollars there. And, I think also, who are the people who blew the whistle on this? The Trayvon Martin Foundation. Yeah, people who are the victims of actual violence and whose families were family members of the people who were actually killed and in question. And no matter how you feel about that, it's a free country, and BLM and many others are able to raise as much money as they would want, but clearly, the funds are not being used in an appropriate manner. So you both have the $40 million or so that they remain in assets, the millions of dollars that they spent on their houses, on their personal compensation, on moving money around to certain family members, and it betrays the ethos of the organization. And if you legitimately believed and wanted to donate, and good-meaning people out there, I'm not saying I agree with them, but there were a lot of good-meaning people out there in 2020 who were like, hey, this is messed up. I want to give money and support something like this. Listen, it's America. You can do what you want with your money. Well, then though, these organizations owe it to them and others to fulfill that spirit, especially whenever there were families like the ones who were families members were killed or were injured or whatever in altercations with police officers. They were relying on some of that money. And they didn't get any of that money. Yeah. That is especially galling.
What you're talking about is some of the, they're called Mothers of the Movement, actually wrote a letter saying, you send a cease and desist saying you cannot use our
my son's name,
family members' names in your fundraising solicitations. And so effectively what happened here is when, there was this massive outpouring of grief and rage over the, horrific circumstances surrounding the murder of George Floyd, people were looking for where to give this, where can I send money so that I can be of service? And this Black Lives Matter, I think it's called Global National Foundation, became kind of the catch-all for that money. And they were not at all, the best thing you could say about them, the most diplomatic thing you could possibly say about them is that they were not at all prepared to operate a charity at the scale of $90 million. They had 2 paid staffers. 2.
Wow.
2 paid staffers.
That's crazy.
To handle this almost $100 million organization. And so, yeah, you see this spending that's, all over the place to family members, to, the father of her child. The reporting, which by the way came from a Black journalist on the real estate purchase, also, raised some really, I think, difficult questions for the organization and how this money that was meant to be spent on racial justice and criminal justice reform was actually being spent purchasing this, fancy $6 million mansion that's appearing in these sort of like glossy YouTube videos that are very like brand building, not seeming to be used for the purposes that they claim that it would be used. There's also a detail in here that Patrisse Cullors used it for a birthday party for her son, but she paid back. She then, sent money in to say, okay, paid you back for the use of this house. In any case, clearly the most relevant questions and the greatest concern initially came from the people who were most affiliated with this movement and really believed in the cause and really, were some of whom were directly harmed by police violence. And we're only now belatedly, and these forms were really late in being filed, getting any kind of a picture of what actually happened with half of this money. So I think, if you are someone who cares about racial justice, like you should be the most concerned about this ultimately, because the more that you learn, the more you see a picture of resources that were just being squandered.
Yeah, and that's the problem with it. Everybody's just ignoring. Microsoft and Amazon cut checks to this lady and to this organization. Like major Fortune 500 organizations included donation links, not only from their companies, but also encouraging their employees. So you basically directed funds. And now this charity is in such disarray and controversy that they've been removed from like the Amazon Smile program.
Yeah.
So, okay, I think somebody needs to explain, especially if you're a corporation, you encourage your employees to donate their money and your own money to this organization. There's a lot of questions here to be asked, but unfortunately, it's been totally brushed under the rug. It took, this New York, and by the way, I'm glad it's a Black journalist, but I don't think it should have to be a Black journalist. Like Andrew Kerr over at the Daily Caller, who I used to work with, been doing this for over a year.
It just made it harder for them to say he's racist.
Yeah, it's like, you could be like, you are a liar. That is just an objective fact. And it's not just, it doesn't have to be a Black person calling it out for us to all understand exactly what was happening here. So anyway, it's, look, it's honestly tragic. Like I said, I have my problems with BLM even at the time and continue, but like there are a lot of people who believed in it, and ultimately I believe in freedom, and they were ripped off. And I think that that's wrong, because at the very least, it should have gone to the Trayvon Martin family. Or the family of George Floyd.
The local chapter.
Or the local chapters.
National BLM chapters. The other part of the reporting was that one of the local chapters wanted to do this this local action, grassroots action, and they were told to stand down because the Black Lives Matter Global National Foundation had some electric slide competition sponsored by UGG boots planned. So this completely corporate thing was, monstrosity was put in place. That's the other part of this story, is that, the founders here are describe themselves as Marxist, and yet, the alliance with big corporations and corporate money is, and then ultimately Mignon Moore from Clinton World coming in to try to right the ship is also another tragic part of this story, in my opinion.
That's really bad. Okay.
All right, guys, thanks for watching. More for you later. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.